My name is Jake. I want to tell you something that happened to me while working on my truck one night on the highway. I've been a truck driver for a little over 15 years, and I've seen many things that, let's say, aren't so common. But there's one in particular that to this day still causes me a lot of unease and some anxiety when I remember it. I want to share it with all of you. A couple of years ago, I was driving on a highway in rural Pennsylvania. I was working, and it was already my second day on the road. It was early in the morning, and I was already a little tired, so I decided to park at the first place I came across. It was a place that seemed to be a rest stop, but in very poor condition. The place seemed abandoned, since there weren't even any lights there. I thought it was the ideal place to park and sleep for a few hours, since no one would stop there, and therefore there wouldn't be any noise or anyone bothering me. So, without thinking twice, I parked in the back of the space, as I felt more comfortable without anyone being able to see my truck. I lay down on the bed in the cab and almost immediately fell asleep, as I was really tired. About 2 hours had passed when, suddenly, something woke me up. It was the voice of a little girl crying, pleading for help. Honestly, my skin crawled when I heard that. I didn't know what to do, because, to be honest, I was really scared to get out of my truck. I didn't know what I would find out there, because what would a little girl be doing alone in the middle of nowhere? I moved into the driver's seat. The crying could still be heard, but this time from a little further away. I tried to see through the windows, but I couldn't see anyone around. Everything was pitch dark, so it was hard to see anything. That voice kept calling for help. I heard it through the woods behind the rest area. It was so convincing that I couldn't stand it anymore, and I got out of my truck to see what was going on. I thought there really might be someone in need of help, as the situation in rural areas can be somewhat delicate. I thought maybe it was a case of a disappearance due to criminals or something like that. A lot of things were going through my head. I turned on my cell phone's flashlight and began to head deeper into the woods, following that voice that kept calling for help. The night was very cold. I don't know if that explains why I suddenly began to feel my body shake and shiver. My legs began to feel weak, and I felt a slight pain in my back that was inexplicable, as I had never suffered from that type of pain. But that's when I realized my body was warning me. It warned me that I was in a dangerous situation and that I should get out of there. But I ignored it and kept going. I was already quite deep in the woods. There were a few trees, but it was completely dark. At one point, the girl's voice grew closer and closer, as if she were right next to me, but I couldn't see anyone anywhere. So I stopped and stood there for about a minute. And then, the voice disappeared. I was there, standing in the middle of nowhere, shining my cell phone in the light, with only the sound of crickets and the animals that lived there in the background. I knew I had to get out of there immediately, but before I could move, the sound of an old woman's laughter, so macabre and eerie, began to be heard right above me. I was in shock, as my legs wouldn't respond, allowing me to run away. I refused to point my flashlight up at all, as I was standing right under a tree. I didn't want to see what was up there mocking me, but I couldn't help myself. When the flashlight illuminated the tree, I saw an old woman hanging with her legs wrapped around the branch, her head facing down, just a short distance from mine. Her long, gray hair barely touched my head. The woman was swinging in such a creepy way while mocking me. With that, I ran as fast as I could toward my trailer. I didn't look back at all. The woman was still laughing, but her horrible voice was getting farther and farther away. That's why I knew she wasn't chasing me. But that didn't take away the panic and adrenaline I felt in those seconds as I ran toward my truck. I arrived and got in immediately. I started the car as fast as I could, almost hitting a passing bus as I tried to get out of there. My whole body was shaking as I drove. I knew I couldn't continue like this, and I pulled into the first gas station I saw to calm down and try to understand what had happened. But, of course, there's no logical explanation for it. It just remained a horrible experience I had to go through. Maybe I was asking for it by going into a desolate and abandoned place, I don't know. But there are things out there in the outlying places we don't know about. Strange people, or dare I say, even beings who aren't on this earthly plane. Take care of yourselves and never make the mistake. That almost cost me my life. If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe the channel for future videos. and like and share with your friends. I'm Chris. I've never been very superstitious, but I know that on the road, there are places where something just doesn't feel right. I'm not talking about ghosts or legends to scare newbies, but about those spots where time seems to stand still or where the rules change. Over the years, I've learned that the best advice from other truckers isn't in the company manuals, but in the warnings passed around at coffee stops and on radio groups. But that day, like many others, I decided to ignore the voice of experience. I had left early with a load of industrial materials, the kind of freight that doesn't seem valuable but would cost a fortune if lost. The drive was long, and I'd already been in the seat for hours, so I started looking for a place to stop, even if it was just to stretch my legs and grab a drink. My original plan was to make it to a station recommended by the company, but sleep was catching up with me faster than I expected. I saw a sign for a gas station a few miles away and decided it didn't matter if I slept there or further ahead. From the moment I took the detour, something made me feel uneasy. It wasn't your typical well-lit station with trucks parked in rows, but an old place with a solitary gas pump and a couple of flickering lamps. There were no cars, no visible employees, just a convenience store with its lights on and a soda machine by the entrance. It wasn't ideal, but tiredness made me ignore that feeling of being in the wrong place. I turned off the engine, locked the doors, and got out for just a moment to buy something to drink. When I entered the store, the first thing I noticed was that it smelled musty, as if no one had opened a window in years. Behind the counter, an older man was watching a small TV, not paying much attention to me. I grabbed a bottle of water, and when I went to pay, the man barely mumbled the price without taking his eyes off the screen. It didn't bother me. I honestly didn't feel like talking. I got out and leaned against the truck door while drinking, looking around, trying to understand what was bothering me so much. That's when I saw the other truck driver. He was standing across the parking lot, next to an old truck, one of those you rarely see on the road anymore. He wasn't wearing a uniform or a company jacket, just dark overalls. He wasn't doing anything. He just stood there, arms hanging at his sides and his head tilted slightly toward me. I didn't see his face clearly, but I felt like he was watching me. I decided to ignore him and got back into the truck. I closed the door tightly, checked that everything was in order, and settled into the seat to sleep for a couple of hours. Nothing could be heard outside, neither the sound of engines nor that of the store. Just an odd silence, as if I were farther from the road than I actually was. I don't know how long it was until I was woken up by knocking on the door. It wasn't a soft knock or an accidental bump. It was a constant, rhythmic, insistent knocking, as if someone were testing how hard they should knock to get me to open the door. I stood still, holding my breath. I looked out the window but didn't see anyone. For a moment, I thought maybe it was my imagination or some noise from somewhere. Then it came again. 3 sharp knocks. I didn't want to open the door, but I took the flashlight and turned it on, illuminating the side of the truck. Nothing. I began to feel a strange chill. Not the kind from the weather, but something deeper, something squeezing my stomach. That's when I heard it. Go! It wasn't a shout or a plea or a whisper. It was a simple word, spoken softly, right next to the cab. I stood motionless, flashlight in hand, and then I noticed something else. The light outside was gone. The parking lot lamps were off. The convenience store was completely dark, and the only illumination was from my own cab. I started the engine without a second thought. I made sure the locks were on and put on the high beams. As I did, I saw the truck driver again. He wasn't where I'd seen him before. Now he was closer, at the entrance of the store, in the shadows. He wasn't moving, he wasn't raising his hand or signaling. He just stood there. I hit the gas without looking back. When I got back on the road, I turned on the radio and tried to tune in to any station. I didn't say anything on the company channel. I didn't want them to think I was losing my mind. I drove without stopping to the next recommended station, and that's where I spoke to another truck driver, someone who'd been on the road for years. "Where did you stop?" he asked me when I told him I'd gone off the road. "At an old gas station, just before reaching the toll booth," I replied. The guy was silent for a moment and then shook his head. "You shouldn't have stopped there," I remained silent, waiting for him to continue talking. That place is drug dealer territory. Years ago, they used it for technical stops, but not to rest, but to disappear people. Truck drivers who fell asleep there, truck drivers who never returned to the road. They said they used them to move merchandise without them noticing, or that they made them disappear just to send a message. The police went several times, but they never found anything. There are no reports, no bodies, just rumors. I swallowed. So, the guy I saw, the other nodded slowly. They say that years ago, a truck driver refused to move a load for them. They unloaded him right there, and no one ever saw him again. Since then, the few who stop at that station claim to have seen him. If you're lucky, you only see him standing in the shadows, watching you. But if he knocks on your door, I felt a chill run down my spine. What does that mean? The guy looked at me seriously. That they don't want you there. And if they warn you, you better listen. I stayed silent. There was no point in arguing it because deep down I already knew it was true. Since then, I follow the recommendations to the letter. I never stray from the established route. I never stop in places that aren't on the maps. And above all, if I hear another knock on my door in the middle of the night, I say thanks, start the engine, and get the hell out of there. Hello everyone, I'm Ronnie. If you're ever warned about a stretch of road, listen to them. Not because strange things are going to happen to you, or because there are spirits, or because you'll get lost in another world. Listen to them because something happened to them. Something they'd rather not explain, but it was enough to make them never try it again. They warned me and I ignored it. It was my first major solo trip, and I didn't want to be seen as a rookie. At the gas station, a group of truck drivers were talking about a stretch where their GPSs stopped working and their radios filled with static. They were talking about how the road wasn't mapped correctly, how some company built it and never finished it, how satellites weren't recording it. Well, there were many theories, but no concrete explanation. The only thing they all agreed on was that when you crossed it, you felt something strange, as if you were out of place. I just listened and laughed. In my head, all those stories were pure exaggeration. Besides, if something went wrong, I just restarted the GPS and kept going. The first hour was normal. The road was lonely, with few lights and even less traffic. But that didn't worry me. What did start to worry me was the feeling that time wasn't moving. I'd look at my clock. A few minutes would go by, look again, and barely a minute had passed. It wasn't tiredness or paranoia, because I was fully awake and alert, but there was something about the atmosphere, about the way the lights on my dashboard flickered as if they didn't have enough power. Then the GPS failed. I thought it was a connection problem and checked the signal, but it didn't work. Then I restarted the system, and it was the same. It was as if the road didn't exist. A few seconds later, the radio started to crackle. I tried to change frequencies, but no matter which one I switched to, the sound was the same. A dry, clunking noise, as if something was trying to break through the interference. I turned the volume up a bit and focused on the road, trying to ignore it. Then the engine whined and the dashboard lights suddenly went out. I didn't panic. It wasn't the first time I'd seen a glitch like this, so I slowed down and calmly pulled the truck over. I sighed and turned off the engine to try to restart it. Nothing. I put on my gloves and got out to check the engine. The air was thick, not cold, but heavy, as if the moisture were too concentrated in one spot. I opened the hood, but I didn't see anything strange. Everything was in its place. When I looked up, that's when I saw it. Across the road, parked exactly like mine, was another truck. Not just any truck. My truck. Same color, same model, even the same oil stain on the lower part of the grille. I didn't understand what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. But the worst part was that someone was inside the cab, and it wasn't someone else. It was me, not a look-alike figure, a shadow, or a reflection. It was me, sitting in the same seat with the same jacket, the same gloves, the same expression of disbelief. I don't know how long I spent staring at it, but at some point, a pain settled in my chest, as if something was squeezing me from within, as if an immense worry prompted by my instinct was growing inside me. Then, a click came over the radio, and suddenly the static stopped. The sound was instantaneous, as if someone on the other side had flipped a switch. When I instinctively blinked at the sound, the other truck was gone. The air returned to normal. The engine started without a hitch. I didn't understand what I was experiencing in that place. I didn't give it a second thought and decided to get out of there. I don't know how long I'd been driving, but when I checked the GPS, the signal had returned, telling me I was miles from where I'd stopped, as if that entire stretch of road had been a pothole. I never told anyone what happened that night, not because they wouldn't believe me, but because I don't want to give it any more space in my head. But since then, I followed the old truck driver's advice. I never take routes that aren't shown on the maps. I never ignore road warnings. And above all, if one day I see a truck identical to mine again, I won't stop to check if the one inside is like me, or if he has darker intentions. Good evening, I'm Jake Turner, and I work as a construction hauler. I spend more time on the roads traveling in my truck than I do in my own home, but it's something I really enjoy. If it weren't for the crime and some strange things that tend to happen on the roads at night, I'd say it's the perfect job for me. I'm going to tell you something very shocking that happened to me on one of these trips I usually take. I tell it, of course, with great respect, but I think this anecdote deserves to be told. I still remember that afternoon well. I left the company where I work and headed to another state. It was April, and I remember it was raining heavily, with several storms forecast for the area, so I was driving very cautiously. I was going slower than usual and couldn't take my eyes off the road, as the rain was so heavy and the darkness made the road even more blurry. It was after 4 a.m. I was listening to the radio while driving cautiously when suddenly, out of nowhere, a woman came out of the woods and cut in front of me, leaving me no time to brake. Yes, I felt like I hit her with my truck. Even though I wasn't going very fast, I knew I had hurt her. I immediately got out in the rain, but not before putting on my flashing lights in case another car was coming. I ran forward, hoping to see the worst, but there was nothing on the asphalt. The headlights of my truck illuminated a good stretch of that road, and no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find any sign of the woman who had cut me off. With a flashlight, I looked under my truck, even going into the woods to see if she was lying there. I wanted to find her so I could help her. I wanted to know if she was alive, but I never found her. I called emergency services, but they told me it would take a couple of hours to get there, that I shouldn't move until they arrived, so I tried to pull over and waited. I was feeling very anxious. I knew it was crucial that the authorities and an ambulance arrive as soon as possible, because the woman, wherever she was, could still be alive and need help. But anyway, after about 2 hours, a patrol car and the paramedics arrived. It was already dawn, so it would be easier to search for the woman, but after an hour of searching, we didn't find anyone. There were no signs of anyone having been run over at the scene. There was absolutely nothing. The officers interrogated me, asking if I had been drinking or using any kind of narcotic. They even searched my truck, but they didn't find anything. I haven't drunk for years, and I've never ingested any kind of substance. I was in my right mind and was driving very slowly. I knew very well what I saw and also what I heard, and it hadn't been my imagination. The officers, somewhat annoyed, asked me to leave, saying that if I filed any kind of false report again, there would be consequences. I gave up explaining what had happened. I didn't want any trouble, so I just left. 2 days passed when I was returning along the same road, this time during daylight, and although it was very cloudy, it wasn't raining. Even so, I was driving slowly and very cautiously, as I was somewhat traumatized by what had happened to me that night. When I was passing by the same place, I couldn't help but stop, because I couldn't get the idea of what had happened out of my head, and the image of that woman wouldn't leave me at peace. I felt like she was still there, needing help, so I pulled over and got out of the truck. I walked along that stretch and went a little deeper into the branches. I wanted to check that everything was okay so I could rest easy. But suddenly, as I was walking, I came across something that surprised me greatly. Right in front of me was a cement cross, one of those they put on the roads after someone has been in an accident. But this cross looked very old and worn. It had no flowers or candles on it. It was obvious it had been there for many years. When I got closer to read what it said, I shuddered because on the cross was written the name of a woman, and the date of death was the same as the early morning the incident occurred, only 10 years earlier. A tear came to my eye. I understood what had happened. I simply touched the cross and wished her eternal rest. Then I left the place, very moved and also somewhat surprised. Since that day, every time I pass by there, I take her a flower, and it seems I am the only one who does so, because her cross is forgotten. Hey everyone, I want to share something that happened to me while I was working as a truck driver on a highway in the United States. I'd like to stay anonymous if possible. I used to transport goods across the border from Mexico to several states in the US. It was on one of these trips that I witnessed something I wish I hadn't. I was heading toward a city in Texas. I'd been driving for hours, and it was getting close to dawn. I needed to stop somewhere to use the bathroom and grab something to keep me awake for a few more hours. Maybe some snacks. I drove until I found a gas station. Without thinking twice, I pulled into the parking lot and got out of my truck. When I walked in, I noticed the place was completely empty. No customers, no employees, but there was country music playing in the background. I walked around, looking for the cashier, but I couldn't find anyone. I decided to check the bathroom since I really needed to go, but it was locked. I could hear noises inside, so I knew someone was in there. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I decided to wait. I picked out some snacks and made myself a coffee while waiting. But after a few minutes, no one came out of the bathroom. I thought it was strange. The cashier had been gone for a long time, and there was no one else around who could have stolen something. I put my items on the counter and walked back to the bathroom. I knocked again, this time asking if they needed help. I could still hear noises inside, but no one answered. Just as I was about to leave, the bathroom door opened. I turned around and saw a woman in her 40s or 50s. She was wearing a black t-shirt with the gas station logo, so I assumed she was the cashier. I told her I wanted to pay for my items and use the bathroom. She gave me a very strange, unsettling look and said, "The bathroom is out of service." I asked her what she had been doing in there, and she replied that she was trying to fix it because she had broken it. The woman was acting very strange. She was smiling at me the whole time, but her behavior was odd. I didn't trust her. I told her to just charge me so I could leave. She walked slowly to the counter, looking me in the eyes the whole time. It was quite awkward. I just wanted to get out of there. When she got to the counter, she told me she couldn't open the register. She said if I didn't have the exact amount, she couldn't give me change. I told her to forget it and just take the $5 bill I gave her for the coffee. I left my other items on the counter and walked out. The whole experience was very strange, and I had a strange feeling that night, something I couldn't explain. The next day, I was sleeping in a motel on my way home when I received a call from an unknown number. It was a state police officer. They needed me to come in for a statement at the police station in that city. They didn't explain much, but they told me I'd been at a crime scene and needed to question me. When I got there, they took me to a room for questioning. They told me I appeared on the cameras at that gas station just after a woman, who was on the run, had arrived and attacked the cashier on duty that night. She had killed him and then taken him to the bathroom to dismember him. They found the cashier with his face disfigured and chunks of flesh missing from various parts of his body. They asked me if I noticed anything strange while I was talking to the woman. I told them exactly what had happened. I never saw a single stain on her hands or clothes, but they said that maybe the woman had washed when she heard someone knocking on the door. She had also taken the cashier's uniform and put it on herself. Because the uniform was black, it wasn't noticeable that it was stained with anything. They let me go after the interrogation, but I had to appear as a witness at the woman's trial. Seeing her again was truly horrible. I still remember her vacant face, but with eyes full of evil and without any remorse, something I'd never seen in a human being. After that, I didn't want to pursue that line of work anymore, and I'm still terrified of driving into any gas station at night. Since then, I haven't stopped having nightmares, and it's something I've been working on in therapy. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you my story as a way to get things off my chest and tell you to always listen to your intuition. When you feel something isn't right, it's because it isn't right.